All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're so happy to have you both live if you're watching virtually after the fact. As a reminder, today's session will be recorded and sent out to everyone who has registered for today's session. So if you haven't already, please use the QR code or the link I am sending in the chat to register for this session and for upcoming ones. Thank you for all of those who submitted questions ahead of time. We will hopefully be answering a lot of them through the didactic portion of today's session and also our panel, and working any of the ones that you submit to us throughout today's talk into the session as well. We'll be throughout the session sending out a link to evaluate today's session, and every future QR code that you'll see on the slides is also for our post-session survey. Everyone who fills out that post-session survey will have access to not only the Zoom chat text, but we've created a job search series handbook and resource guide this year that we will send out to everyone who completes those surveys. Last reminder, the Zoom links for the upcoming 2 sessions will be sent out the week of those sessions, but welcome everyone. Next slide. So you are joining in today on our session titled How to Do the Academic Practice Job Search Didactic and Q&A Panel. Next slide. The session outline for today, so the first half hour or so will be didactic, followed by an hour of really kind of rapid fire questions that you've submitted to our panelists. Feel free to send any additional questions to our moderator, who I will introduce momentarily. And then as a reminder to our speakers and panelists today, feel free to use the chat to answer any questions and provide different perspectives that you may have during both the didactic and the panel today. We try to assign certain questions to certain panelists. And so if you have a different perspective, please feel free to throw those into the chat. Next slide. So I am here to introduce our moderator for today's session, and it is Dr. Erin Bergner. She did her residency and fellowship at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston at Texas Children's Hospital, and is currently the assistant professor and fellowship associate program director at the University of Oklahoma. She's also the assistant medical director over nutrition. And so obviously her interests include nutrition, human milk, but also mentorship, professional development, and program administration. So I'll turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Nicole. I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers. And as Nicole said, if you have any questions that you want answered and maybe don't feel comfortable putting them in the whole chat, you're welcome to just send me them directly and I can ask them of our panelists as well. So today I wanted to introduce our speaker, who's Rob Engert. He did his residency and fellowship both at Tufts in New England Medical Center. He currently is an associate professor at NYU Grossman. He's the fellowship program director and is also the co-director of faculty development and is a lead faculty for the POCUS program as well. His interests in accordance with his leadership roles include POCUS, family-centered care, patient safety and error prevention, education innovation, simulation-based training, fellowship program administration, and we are happy to have him here today.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm going to just share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm happy to talk to everybody today and have this opportunity to discuss the job search for an academic position. I have no financial disclosures or conflict of interest. For today, the learning objectives will be to learn about the process and timeline of applying for an academic job, integrate job availability and geographic considerations into your job search, learn to use your own network, and then learn how to obtain interviews, prepare, perform, and follow up on obtaining an academic job. And, just as a disclosure, there are 2 other fantastic talks in this series already. And then there are, I believe, 2 more to come. And so we make an effort to not be redundant. So there may be some other information that I'll mention that's contained in those other talks or that will be coming in the future. And this is really tailored toward just the academic job search. So I may point you to those other talks to get some more information just because we're limited by the 30-minute time frame. Okay, so as you approach your completion of fellowship, there's kind of a dividing line, and you were asked to make a decision. Are you going to go into private practice, academic? And in reality, these types of practice are not really so siloed. There are some private practice jobs that have some academics to them with teaching and trainees and vice versa. And then a common question that people ask is, can you go back and forth? Like if you go into private practice, is that it? Can you go back to academics? And if you're in academics, can you go to private practice? And the answer is yes, you can, but it's not easy. It is difficult to make a transition between those two, partly because you get more specialized and differentiated in the area that you're in, and then it becomes a little bit challenging to move from one area to the other. For example, if you're in private practice, to get into academics, there are requirements and interest in you doing academic things. And if you've done those types of things during your private practice, like you've published some papers, you've done some research, you've taken the initiative, you will be of interest to people who are trying to hire in the academic centers. And then vice versa, the private practice are many of those are frontline jobs where you're providing direct patient care. And if you've been in a supervisory role, working with a lot of advanced practitioners, residents, fellows, there also could be a whole different set of challenges, but it absolutely is possible. And I know many people who've done it. It just takes a little bit of forethought, planning, and then hard work. So what are the expectations for academic jobs? Well, generally the service time varies a great deal, anywhere from 8 to 22 weeks or so. And that depends on if you have grants, if you're primarily lab-based, if you're really in a research tenure track position, you'll be on the lower side. If you're in a more clinical type position, you'll be on the higher side. Generally, most of these jobs have in-house call requirements, 3 to 5 per month on the higher side when you're more junior. And then as you get more senior and more gray hair, you go to the lower end. And then vacation time, it varies a lot. I just put an average is probably about 4 weeks a year is what most people would anticipate. You generally get some office space to go along with that to do your non-clinical academic work. And then there's different elements or different degrees of research support that are available in different institutions, some academic funds that you should expect. And then, of course, the usual things like healthcare benefits, retirement contributions, savings accounts, et cetera. Old-fashioned pensions are few and far between. That's not something that's really that common, although there are some institutions that still offer the regular old-fashioned type pension. Well, what are the benefits of academic medicine? So true story, my pediatrician growing up drove a Rolls Royce. So I was under no such delusion when I entered pediatrics that I was going to be driving a Rolls Royce myself, nor was that really of interest to me. And if you listen to the previous talk, which was on private practice, there definitely are some differences. They're not quite as stark as you might think in terms of overall compensation. But one thing that is really strong in academic medicine is job satisfaction. And this is a picture of all of our fellows, my associate program director, myself, on our retreat with all of our fellows, happily on a lobster boat on the Hudson River, enjoying ourselves. And it really is, I would say, quite protective against burnout, to work with trainees, to be in academics, to constantly be supervising research and learning new things. It's really a lot of pluses. So generally, with your first academic job, there will be some type of appointment. Some institutions bring you in as a clinical instructor, which is not academic immediately, but many will bring you in as an assistant professor. And people have questions about how do you get promoted along your pathways. And so this matrix was actually part of a faculty development session given by one of our leads in helping folks get promoted. And I can't describe the whole hour to you in the 30 seconds that I've allotted for this slide, but I'll just point out that generally there are 3 levels of promotion: assistant, associate, and professor, and those are listed along the top here. And along the left side are the different tenure tracks. Now, these are specific, or the different tracks. These are specific to NYU, and other places may have different designations for the type of professor that you may be. So I would point you to the website of the institution that you're applying to see what the promotions tracks look like. Generally, those are publicly available. You can see them. But at NYU, there's a clinical track, and this is for predominantly clinicians, and you can get promoted from assistant to associate and professor along this track. The scholar track has the same designations, but that has a higher requirement for scholarly work, publishing, and academic innovation. And then the tenure track is the most stringent of all, and that has other benefits as well, and then time constraints. But these are the kind of three approaches and different ways you have to progress through the different pathways to promotion. And they can be very fulfilling, and your institution will provide you lots of support in terms of helping you understand how to go from one stage to the next. So the timeline was reviewed in Dr. Meyer's earlier talk, the first one about the overall picture. But I'll just say that in general, as he pointed out, most academic institutions work by applying for new positions in the late fall, and the approval comes in the new calendar year. So people generally have an idea that they will have a new position late in the fall, and then they'll really know come January 1. So you can kind of work backwards in terms of your own timeline. In the first half of your second year, you should really be thinking about career planning, learning using different opportunities to talk to faculty and figure out job resources. And in the second half of your second year, you should be working on updating your CV, which should continually be updated, thinking about preparing cover letters, networking, and then research, looking at potential practices and programs. You should be looking into those. And this is a general timeline. I'm going to make my slides available. I don't want to spend a lot of time going through this because, again, it was gone through before. But I'm just going to point out the differences for academic calendars. You really want to get things ready and going in the fall of your third year. And then it's nice. Most people have their interviews in the fall and early and winter months. And then those jobs are secured, usually January, February, and then March, April, May are used to negotiate contracts, sign them, do credentialing, and preparing to move. So just a word about academic NICUs. So there are, according to this paper that was just published last month on the journal Neonatology, they did a whole survey of all the different types of NICUs in the US, and there are 1,424 NICUs in the US, and this is the breakdown by level. So you can see among level 4 NICUs, there are 152 in the US, and then 702 level 3 hospitals and 570 level 2s. And these are the distribution by region. And for our interest, I'm highlighting here the number of academic medical centers, and this is self-designated by this survey, was 177. So, I can imagine, I heard that there are maybe 350 people signed up for this talk. So there are a lot of people who are interested, or at least curious about academic medicine, but there aren't that many academic medical centers who are predominantly academic. Again, there is some overlap, and many centers that are more, may designate themselves as community, have academic elements, like they have residency training programs, and they may do some clinical research or have affiliations with lab and bench research. So there is overlap. It's not exclusive to these NICUs, but the number is a little more limited than you may think. So here are the different elements of an academic job that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to talk about how they may impact your career and your application for an academic job. So first of all, your research really is the most important element of your application to an academic medical center. And this is really the core of what most division chiefs will be looking for. And so what I'm going to do now is really pose a bunch of questions to you, because, really, these are very personalized decisions about what you're going to be doing, and you can answer for yourself whether these are things that, suit you. Just to go through them, first question you want to ask is, do you want to continue doing the same research that you've done for your own research topic in your new institution? That has some major benefits, and it also has some challenges. So you have to ask yourself, well, what experience do I have that could lead to success? Some people have additional training, PhD, Master in Public Health, Master of Health Professions Education, QI training, things that you can bring with you that'll really help establish you as a researcher. Maybe you have a dedication and a track record to a particular research area. Maybe during your fellowship, you generated some questions that you still want to answer, and you have the tools to do that. And then, did you learn skills that you can use at the other institutions, or are some of the things that you do really specific to the institution you came from? So perhaps you may want to shift your research focus. If this is the case, then you have to really ask yourself, well, what area are you interested in? And then what resources do you need? That is a really big question that'll lead to your success, and it'll demonstrate to your potential employers that you've really thought through the process, that, it's not just a matter of, oh, I'm really ambitious, I want to do this thing, but it's what do I actually need to make that successful? And then can you use the skills that you have, or do you need to learn some new skills? And then how are you going to go about doing that in your new work environment? And then what resources are necessary for you to be successful at this different institution? And very importantly, what mentorship exists in the new institution where you're seeking employment? And then, of course, what kind of protected time and funding will you need to be successful? So these are the elements that you're really going to need if you're going to shift your research focus to something new. And these are questions that you can ask yourself, and then hopefully they'll help guide you in formulating how you're going to present yourself to your potential employers. So some personal factors for research is, really important is your track record. Did you do research in undergrad, residency, other places in life, perhaps pre-medical school, you did some research? And does your track record speak to somebody who's likely to be independent? Again, the training that you have, any kind of project participation, especially leadership positions. The publications that you've had can really speak to what kind of research you'll be and what your role was in those publications. Did you initiate the research? Did you just participate in a larger trial? And then did you receive any grants individually? That's something that can demonstrate that you have a really good path towards independence. And so that's what potential employers are going to look for, is that, you may have been working in a mentored position in a lab or somebody who has funding, but if you're going to a new place, well, what is your potential for independence? So again, how much of your work that you want to do can be done elsewhere? What kind of support is available at the new facility that you're going to? What does the research environment there look like? There are some places that don't have a lot of research, but they really want to hire a new researcher. If you're brand new and don't have a lot of experience and expertise, you need mentorship, a good environment. That might not be the best situation for you. If you're someone who has a lot of motivation, has a PhD, and really has a great track record, and you think that you can really make it work there, they're really dedicated and they're going to devote a lot of resources, it may be a perfect situation for you. If you're working in a lab, is it within the division? Is it outside the division? How dedicated are they to your success? And then if it's within a larger institute in the hospital or medical center, what kind of funding do they have? How dedicated are they to developing new faculty and putting in all of the effort and investment that it takes for you to be successful? And then what kind of shared facilities are you going to need to do your work? So some examples are like animal facilities, tissue culture, microscopy, genetics core, et cetera. These are really important things for people doing basic science type research and other work. And then statistical support is also really important and in terms of your own needs. Grant writing support is usually available at major institutions, and this is something that's really important for working towards independence. So teaching is the next big area in academics I'm going to talk about. And again, ask yourself these questions. Do you like teaching residents and fellows? How much teaching do you want to do as part of your permanent job? And so during your training, it's really important, if this is something that you want to do, you want to seek out opportunities to teach and interact with residents and medical students while you're there, and then highlight that as you present yourself to institutions. You can do things like volunteering to give extra talks. You can get involved in developing curriculum, education, research, and projects. Research projects are very important in demonstrating how dedicated you are. You can get additional training and simulation-based education. And then resident recruitment offers additional responsibilities to get involved in program administration. So if you've done all of these things and you're looking for an academic job, great, highlight those in your CV. These are things to talk about, to sell yourself to the new job, to really convince them that you're going to fill a vital role that they need filled. There may be medical teaching opportunities in the first couple of years of medical school, like introduction to clinical medicine type courses. These are just examples of things that you may have done that really could demonstrate to your potential employer that you're the kind of person who they want to have working in their institution. And then also I'd suggest using some objective data. Like if you get evaluations of yourself by residents, medical students, that's objective data that can tell you, hey, look, everyone really gives me positive feedback. This is something I'm interested in. This is something I really want to do. So the clinical work in academic medical centers, your clinical experience should at least match the needs for the job that you're seeking. So, if you don't have the experience in the type of institution that you're looking for, you should certainly seek it out. But if you didn't have a lot, for example, you didn't work at a place that had ECMO and you need that, then you should try to seek out the experience that would get you up to speed so that you could work there. Most places have a training program anyway for anyone who comes from outside to ensure that they're able to manage the patients. requirements, but these are just considerations for what type of job you're looking for. Think of what type of services that are being covered and who you will be working with. What are the teaching expectations? Some academic centers ask you to do level 2 work. Sometimes there's newborn nursery coverage. There may be administrative expectations that exist in an academic setting. And there are clinical leadership opportunities. If you're interested in policies, procedures, QI, associate medical director is a position that a lot of people might be interested in. And then QI work and experience is another thing. So visa status, may impact your choices. And geographic flexibility really may be helpful in these instances. Discuss this with your colleagues who've gone through the process if you have resources like that. And then always consult an immigration lawyer for questions, because when you go from a training position to a working position, there are some very big complexities that you need to address way ahead of time. So in your second year, we recommend that our trainees start to initiate the process and think about where they're going to go and what kind of support they might need. So on the topic of geography, you have to ask yourself, what are your ties to location, the community itself, schools, cultural offerings, nightlife, etc. And then, moving away from certain metropolitan centers in all areas, whether it be private practice or academics, really can offer more opportunities, pay, perks, etc. And I'm coming from New York, but I looked at the place with the lowest cost of living. Statistically, it's Mississippi. And I love blues. I'd love to visit the Delta Blues Museum. So lots of places, I think offer many opportunities. So make sure your search is broad enough. And so in academics, you want to ask yourself, well, what's important to you? So you can make a list of needs and wants, look for the research opportunities that are there, do lots of online research, and look for an institution that has a success at career building. Like if they have taken a lot of people who are junior and then they've become successful, been promoted to associate and full professor, have grants and have research careers, and that's a good indicator that they could do the same for you. There are other perks that you get with academics, like the office, the calls may be a little bit different. Think about the different opportunities, different responsibilities that they're going to have you do. Mentorship, as I said before, is really important. Some institutions offer moonlighting. Housing and living costs may really weigh heavily. Debt is a very big consideration for many people, so be sure to talk about this with your mentors. And then if you have a spouse, really obviously work with them to make sure that you're applying in places that are mutually acceptable. Or if you need a spouse, you want one, make sure you can go to a place where it's maybe not so hard to find one. And I think very importantly, really use your network. And your network, as was said in other talks, is probably way bigger than you think. I think sometimes the single most important factor can be somebody who just knows you or knows someone who knows you. So think of the people who are in your circle. It's like 6 degrees of separation. Your direct clinical mentor or your mentor in fellowship, your program director is a huge resource. Other attendings you may know, attendings you remember from residency, friends from residency. Very importantly, people you've met at meetings, recently graduated fellows from your program, all can help you expand your network and reach out and try to find where the jobs are. So unfortunately, there really isn't any central clearinghouse per se. Most of the best jobs are not posted in academics, so you really do have to use your network. And again, mentors, division chiefs, faculty phone calls and emails are super important. There is an AP job website, but most of those postings are for jobs that are already kind of pre-filled, like somebody already they have in mind. And then there's some discipline-specific websites like Neonatology.org that does post jobs. And then physician recruiters, just be careful, especially in academics. They will share, they may be sharing your CV. They'll hold on to it if you send it to them. So just be mindful of that. Scheduling an interview, be really flexible, try to minimize disruption. You may or may not be reimbursed, but really try to coordinate that. For academics, the type of interviews are a little bit different. Generally, there's maybe a virtual interview, and now your first interview might be an in-person interview, but I would encourage everyone to take virtual interviews very seriously. Assume it's a regular interview, dress accordingly, be on time, do all the things you need, make sure your text works. Don't take it lightly because this is their first impression and going to determine whether they're going to have a follow-up interview. Generally, in an academic first interview, you want to know who you're meeting. You're going to you may meet all of the attendings, you may meet a large portion of them. You may meet with some other attendings who interact frequently with your subspecialty, perhaps the department chair. You might meet with the vice president or a C-suite executive if that institution does that. There may be institute leaders within your organization if it's relevant to the type of research that you want to do or the type of work that you're being hired to do, for example, QI, and then also research collaborators and mentors. And you can actually reach out and ask to talk to certain people if there are folks who have research overlaps with yours that are of interest to you. So after you've done your virtual, if that happens, your in-person interview, then there's also typically a follow-up interview or research presentation. So for your interview, like any interview, just do your homework. Make sure you know who you're talking to, plan to be early, think about what they're looking for, ask yourself if you fill the gap that they have, and then talk with anyone you know who has a connection there. Be really careful to review your own research projects so that you're up to date on them. Make sure you know them cold. And some of them might have been done a year ago and completed and you moved on, but just take a moment to review them. They're going to be really interested in how facile you are at discussing them. And then maybe do a new literature search if they were done a long time ago to make sure you're up to date in the field. It's good to take notes, and generally don't ask about salary in the first interview. It's not something that's broached. If you're asked for a follow-up question, that's when compensation gets discussed. So, of course, like typical interview advice, being professional, be prepared, know what you need, and listen carefully. It's okay to ask multiple questions, multiple people similar questions, but don't ask everyone the same question. And then you get a sense of the group and whether they like each other. There are a bunch of questions here that I'm just putting down that you can read through. I'm going to send this all out as a PDF. So if you want to look at these, you can. They're easily available. But they're typical interview questions. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about interview don'ts, because I think those are really important. Make sure you don't disparage any other institutions, especially your own. That should go without saying, but it doesn't reflect well on you. And then try not to ask any inflammatory or condescending questions. That doesn't reflect well on you either. And then don't forget to keep in touch and respond in a timely manner to communications, emails, phone calls, etc. And then lastly, just don't be inconsiderate of administrative staff. They tend to have the ear of the division chief. And so it only benefits you to be kind and to be thoughtful and polite. So your research presentation, this is something generally unique to academic positions. And this should really generally focus on your primary research project if this is the topic of research you plan to continue. And it's a great opportunity for you to provide some background to your audience about what you've done, and then really think out and discuss the future directions really carefully, because this is what you're proposing to do in their institution. And the more you can think this out and kind of project it into the future, I think the more it says to the institution that you've really thought this out beyond just getting the job, but what you're actually going to do there in the future, and is it feasible? I strongly suggest that you review all your research carefully with your research mentor to ensure accuracy. Just remember, you're also representing them if they're your mentor out when you're presenting these types of things. And then practice your talk with your group so that you can get all the tough questions ahead of time and answer them. So following up, always have good follow-up communication. Generally, an email is preferred unless otherwise stated. And then don't leave people hanging. There's a whole talk on contract negotiation, handling multiple job offers once those come rolling in. So I'll leave it to that to talk about. But really, we're a small community, and burn bridges are bad for both you and for the program. And if you get a job, once you do get a job offer, it's really great. Again, academic centers tend to work on a shorter timeline. So you may have less time to decide. They may be choosing between a small number of people who all are qualified, but you may be their preferred candidate. So really try to get a sense of how much time you have. Consider all the different factors that I discussed earlier. The contract negotiations part, as I said, is a separate talk, so stay tuned, come to the follow-up talks. But for your negotiation with regards to an academic job, really the number of clinical months versus protected time is the key factor that you want to think about, because you want to make sure that you have the greatest chance for success. And if you're basically working like a clinical neonatologist with many, many weeks of service, lots of call, other responsibilities, you're not going to have much time to be successful with your research. And so be careful not to overextend yourself before you've even shown up. There are pay resources available. Again, I will point you to the private practice talk that was the one before this. I watched that in preparation for this. tons of great information in there. If you can get your hands on the AAMC faculty salary report, it lags by a couple of years, but it has the average salary and compensation by region and by level of achievement. And then there's some other online things like Doximity, Weatherby, Glassdoor, just things to look at. Once you get a job acceptance, again, the timelines are maybe a little shorter than private practice. So make sure that you apply for a medical license in a state if you're moving to a new one early, because it can take a long time. And then credentialing, obviously, you want to make sure that you get credentialed at the institution quickly, because it's going to take a lot more time than you generally expect. As you go through your medical career and are at more and more institutions, it builds up, and it is the forms get longer and longer to fill out. And then you can take some time to really start making some research connections, meeting with collaborators, lab colleagues, etc. Really thinking about the work that you're going to be doing so that you can hit the ground running, because time flies when you're in attending. I will definitely attest to that, as I have just been to my 25th year med school reunion. As one of the not burned out people, I was very happy with all the choices in my life. But I, urge you to look inward and reflect and talk with your mentors and really think about what's right for you, and then, use your mentors and your network to be successful in your job search. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. That was excellent. If you can stop sharing your screen there,
Sure.
we'll go to the panel
Great.
session. All right. Are you guys seeing the right screen? Panel. So now we're going to move over to the panel discussion. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. So Rob will continue to act as a panelist, as our wonderful speaker, and then we have a couple others to introduce to you. So first I want to introduce Betsy Crouch. So she did her residency and fellowship both at the University of California, San Francisco. She's currently an assistant adjunct professor at the University of California, San Francisco, and her interests include human brain development, preterm brain injury, and IVH. Thank you, Betsy, for joining us. Sorry, missed your slide there. Our next panelist is Dr. Mitzi Good. She did residency at the Children's Hospital of Illinois and fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. She's currently the division chief and associate professor at the University of North Carolina. Her interests include the pathogenesis of neck and physician scientist education. And then last but not least is Dr. Morgan Hill. She did both her residency and fellowship at CHOP, and she's currently an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati and also serves as the medical director of the Good Samaritan Hospital Neonatal Follow-Up Clinic. Her interests include delivery room resuscitation, video review of delivery room resuscitation, medical education, simulation, and reading and word exposure in the NICU and follow-up clinic. So welcome to all of our panelists as well. So just a reminder that this QR code is for the evaluation of the session. That'll be up there for you. And we'll do some initial questions that we kind of had pre-planned to ensure that we covered them. And I'll direct them to individual panelists, to probably two, but if the other panelists have an opinion or thought on them, please go ahead and put them in the chat as well for everyone else to see. So first question, I'll direct at Morgan, and then Betsy, if you can follow up with your answer on that. Why did you pick academia?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So again, I'm Morgan Hill, and I am currently at Cincinnati Children's. And I have kind of three big bucket responses to this question. One is, as you guys saw in my interests, I'm really passionate about all things medical education, and I definitely wanted to work with trainees. And not that you can't do that in some private practice locations, but I knew that a big academic center was a good place for me because I actually really love working with not only NICU fellows and pediatric residents, but also medical students. And I get to do all of those things at my current academic center. And then then I really just like kind of the breadth of experience that I have the opportunity to be involved in. So not just these educational experiences I just mentioned, but also kind of the clinical experiences that I have working both kind of at a level 3, level 4 center, and even some level 2. I have kind of the opportunity to see all different things from a clinical perspective as well. And then a lot of really great, unique research opportunities, and then resources for all of those things at an academic center. And then finally, I think the kind of work-life balance that this afforded me is really appealing. And so when I say that, kind of think like your mix of clinical and non-clinical responsibilities. So not just like work and personal, but also what you're doing at work. And I really like kind of the balance of my clinical job, but then also my non-clinical role and responsibilities too.
Great, thank you. Betsy, any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I'll say thanks to Rob for an awesome intro, and thanks to Morgan for, getting us started on this question. I think there are, will be similar themes that come up, but I'll say that I trained as an MD PhD, like I did an MD PhD traditional route at Columbia. I think I've always enjoyed research, and more specifically, primarily like basic research, understanding the development of blood vessel cells in the brain, but I've gotten fairly translational, as we're all neonatologists. I think a lot about germinal matrix hemorrhage and why we don't understand its pathogenesis. That really bothers me. And then increasingly, actually, I've gotten into qualitative work, doing interviews with families who have experienced neonatal loss and understanding how donating to research is helpful for them. So, I think it's fair to say that research and primarily, the type of research that Rob was talking about, involving like startup packages and microscopes and, cells and things is what I do. So this is why, obviously, I picked academia. I do know, other folks who are, let's say, clinical researchers who do research outside of the academic setting, but certainly if you're a basic scientist, I can't think of anybody who does that type of work outside of academia. So within that research bucket, though, there are 3 reasons why research continues to be important to me. One is that, I feel like I have skills that I've trained in, that I enjoy, basic science skills, but also increasingly like the analysis, the paper writing, the giving talks, the writing grants. Like these are skills that I feel like are well suited to me and that, frankly, I enjoy. I think the other reason is that, for me personally, the sad cases that we have are really impactful to me. I started working on germinal matrix hemorrhage because I had an experience, in part because I had an experience as a resident caring for a family whose baby had a terrible germinal matrix hemorrhage. And I found it really, unjust that we didn't have any therapies to offer this family. And so that's something that drives me. And when I have an experience that's sad, in my clinical work, I take comfort in going to the lab and trying to do something to like make our work better. And so I think psychologically, this is something that works for me and that is important to me. And finally, and Morgan hit on this a little bit, but I'll also just say that as a person who's an academic researcher, I do 80% research and 20% clinical. That's a much better work-life balance for me. And I think specifically the flexibility. If you're primarily a clinician, I was speaking to a colleague who, is in a clinical job in Southern California. You're going to be in the hospital a lot more. And that's not flexible for a person who's also a mother. So for me, actually, the flexibility of academia and being able to do my research work and fit that in like whenever it works for me and take a lunch and go to my kids, lunchtime performance, I think is really important to me. And I'm really grateful that I'm able to maintain that as a person in academia.
Great, thank you. I completely agree with those. I think it has a lot to do with being able to have varied interests, being able to be flexible for sure. So we'll move to our next question. And so Betsy, I'm sorry, you said talk about it, so I'm going to ask you first again. And then Morgan, I'll have you follow her up. So please describe the typical or day-to-day roles and responsibilities of different junior faculty members at your institutions.
Yeah, this is so variable. So, but I can talk a little bit about my balance for this. I will say that I enjoy all of these pieces, and that's what you just hit on too, Erin. And that's one of the reasons why I'm still in academia. Okay, so let's take like a day where I fit in everything that I might be doing. And I think, it broadly can involve doing my own research. So usually these days that's like writing a manuscript or a grant. Then I do a lot of supervising of mentees, and I find this inspiring. I love giving a project to a different smart person and seeing how they run with it. And that's like, it amazes me that that's how academia is set up and what I get to do. And I think you get to do a little bit of that in the clinical setting also, where, in, I think, an appropriate supervisory way, you can give your fellow some like free rein, to manage problems and then come to you, when it's with the right fellow, and then manage the problem and then come to you when it's appropriate. So I do really enjoy the mentoring, the teaching, and that's, I would say, 50% of my day on a daily basis. I also meet with the folks in my lab for an hour every week. And then there's the clinical work. And even as a person who's 20% clinical, as in neonatology, I think this is useful to know, that's 6 weeks inpatient service. And then I'm on call like once every 2 weeks. So even as Rob was talking about that, I always do think that if for some reason my grant funding dried up, I could go do a full-time clinical job, because I'm still on call once every 2 weeks and I'm still managing a lot, at 2 a.m. like we all do. And I will continue to do that. Some research folks like drop the call at some point. For me, I see myself doing that, I don't know, arbitrarily, like for 10 years out of fellowship, because I just feel like I really still gain a lot from interacting with trainees, from managing the clinical situations, and from keeping those skills up. Because as we all know, like when you have your fellow in the first month of fellowship, you're still doing all of the procedures with them, which is good. I like recertify every summer. So I guess that's a little bit of my typical day-to-day role.
Thank you, Betsy. What about you, Morgan? What's your typical day, or a typical day of another junior faculty member?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And I think to kind of echo what Betsy said, there's really no typical day for me, which is kind of partly what I love, is that if you go back and look at my calendar, like every week is different and every day is a little bit different. And I am also unique compared to Betsy in that I have primarily a clinical job with some protected time for both kind of education and research. And so I actually do about 10 weeks of service a year. And those weeks are pretty consistent, right? And all of us kind of know what those weeks look like. And then in addition to that, with my role in clinic, I do clinic about 1 day a week. And clinic is going to be kind of a usual, more typical 8 to 5, where I'm seeing kind of our follow-up patients. And then outside of that, all of my days are very variable. And some days I'm spending a lot of time doing teaching, education. Some days I'm in committee meetings. Some days I have protected time working on research and doing data collection. Some days I'm meeting with my mentees. And again, every day is very different. And I think this is actually quite typical of most of the junior faculty at my institution, but it's all right. What your day-to-day outside of clinical time looks like is going to just vary depending on what your either research interests are or education interests are, but variable. And I think the really nice thing, the only other thing I'll say is that I think this can change with time. And so the nice thing I think about academia is that when you take this job, as your interests change and you kind of mature and kind of grow, you can shift what your focus is and what your day-to-day looks like, depending on what you end up being most passionate about and involved in.
I just want to second what Morgan was saying about being able to kind of like chase your dreams a little bit and be creative. I think that academia really allows that in a unique way. Like as long as your division director is kind of okay with what you're doing in the research realm and you have a particular interest, you can kind of like chase that down and work in that area. And as long as you're doing something productive, it's all good. And so I think that's kind of unique. And I imagine it's a little less possible when you're just in a structured clinical job without the kind of academic mission that exists in these institutions.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that, you guys. I think that's a really helpful depiction, even though it is variable. But I think it's something that a lot of our trainees don't actually know what we do. Actually, one of my fellows who was interviewing recently said, you know, I actually don't know what you guys do. You could be in Timbuktu when you're not on service. I'm not quite sure. So I think it really helps people to understand what life could look like. So for next question, I'm going to direct this actually first at Misty, and then Rob, I'm going to have you answer too, because you probably end up interviewing a lot of people, I would assume. So how specific do your future career thoughts need to be when you're applying and interviewing?
Thanks for that question, Erin. I think it depends on what type of position you're going for. Are you going for a physician scientist position where you want a significant amount of protected time, like Betsy was mentioning, or is it that you are going for a clinician educator position where most of your time is going to be focused in the clinical arena, but then also training trainees and fostering their education. I think when you're interviewing, it's definitely important to be your authentic self and know yourself and know what you're passionate about. And so we talked a little bit in the chat about that, but I really think, to follow up on what Morgan was saying in the chat, it's important that if you have an area of interest that you show productivity and output in that arena. And that doesn't have to necessarily always be a publication, but it does need to be, if you want to focus on education, are you giving presentations in that space, and what type of education opportunities are you taking advantage of? And so sometimes, we talk about saying yes versus saying no to opportunities that come along. But I would say when you're, late second year and third year fellow, those opportunities are going to come, and you should definitely take them so you can update your CV and become a great applicant when you're looking for a faculty position. But you also want to differentiate yourself from others. So there are a lot of third year graduating fellows, and so some of them are restricted to certain regions, et cetera. And so just thinking about how you can market yourself in that space for that particular division that may have strengths and or weaknesses in other, in different places. But you want to make sure, if you, let's say, for example, I study necrotizing enterocolitis. So if I'm, looking for a job, if I'm a graduating fellow looking for a job, you want to make sure you include that interest in your cover letter. So as a division chief, when we're looking at cover letters, we really want to know what it is that you're passionate about and how that can then differentiate you from someone else. But if you do have specific interests like NEC, you want to make sure that if you're going to be a physician scientist, for example, that there's a NEC researcher or somebody that at least does gastrointestinal work that can mentor you in that space. So as Rob mentioned earlier, it is important to know, if you're going to be starting out as a first year faculty, do you have mentorship to help you, write the grants, as Betsy was mentioning, and and write the manuscripts, because you can't go at it alone. Being a physician scientist is definitely a team sport, and so just recognizing what that means. And you may not have that mentorship available at your institution, but I'm always interested in fostering the next generation of physician scientists. So if you ever need anything and want to pursue that path, certainly email me and let me know. And then I'll just go real quick, one more thing. Sorry, I would say, when you are thinking about your specific focus, if you want to be a clinician educator, for example, thinking about your career in like 3 to 5 year increments. And, if you're interested, let's say in fellowship education, for example, would you want to be involved in program director leadership, like an APD or a PD long term, like have a 3 to 5 year plan for yourself? Because I think as division chiefs, we're always thinking about, the division's 3 to 5 year plans and upcoming retirements, or people that may be moving on to other, jobs. And I think it's important, as we think about filling those voids, how our new recruits could potentially fill those when they're ready.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Rob.
I was gonna jump in. I was thinking about the same thing about like, you know, the kind of question, oh, where do you imagine yourself in 5 years? But you should ask and answer that question, even if like nobody asks you the question, you should kind of have a sense. And then you like look through your own CV and your own history and your own likes and dislikes and say, do I really have a track record in this area? And it's never too late. Like if there are gaps, you know, like maybe you, like I had a fellow who, when she started thinking about jobs, like I really love education, I'm really into sim. It's like, well, you know, world's your oyster. So she went and got extra sim training at our sim center. She got really involved in designing some like special simulations and got a grant to do, you know, and it's like, now that's part of her, you know, knowledge base and experience. And it's something that like she can pursue with legitimacy. And I think, you know, division directors will take that seriously when somebody says something and they also have a track record in that area. It speaks to the fact that they're likely to continue and be successful there. So try to like make your career have kind of an arc that makes sense a little bit. That way, I think, you know, there's some kind of thread that ties it together that you will likely continue along that pathway. I think those are some things that are useful. So yeah, like say yes when things come up. Like if you're in an RCA and something happened and you're like, wow, that's crazy. But then there's this committee that's working on that problem. Go work on that committee. Work on the problem, like learn some more about the operational things behind it. And then maybe that'll inspire a research project or, you know, a collaboration. You'll meet someone you didn't, you know, meet before, or whatever. There are like all kinds of ways that you can network and build your CV and your track record and your skill set so that you're really appealing to that, you know, institution that needs a person that does X, whatever it is that you have developed expertise in.
Yes, thank you.
I would just add something that Rob said that's really, it hits it on the head, and it's important to recognize within oneself when you're interviewing is while it's important to know what you like, it is also important to know what you don't like. For example, I love level 4 work and I don't want to do level 2 work, for example, and or outpatient clinic. Like I haven't done it since fellowship, and you know, my goal is to never actually have to do it again. And so so I think understanding that within yourself and what you love most about this job and following that is really important. And like working with trainees or not working with trainees, I mean, I love that, and I wouldn't want a job that didn't have them.
Awesome. Thank you. Great advice. I think kind of sums it up nicely. Like to know yourself, say yes to a lot of things and be willing to learn things, but also know what you want to say no to too, so you can protect your time wisely. So next question is, I'll direct to Morgan first, and then Betsy, if you could follow up with your answer after that. So how does your work-life integration as a junior faculty compare to that during training?
This is a tough question that I think we could probably spend an hour talking about, right? Just this question. But overall, honestly, I think quite fantastic. I'm really happy right now with my position and kind of my work-life integration. And a lot of what we've talked about in kind of these previous questions has led me to achieve that, I think, right? Like thinking very specifically about like, what are your goals? What are you most passionate about? What do you want to chase after? Looking for that very intentionally in a job, having the time to do those things, one is going to just make your job very fulfilling. And then again, being kind of in academia has given me, I think, really great work-life integration with the kind of balance between clinical and non-clinical responsibilities, and then the flexibility that my non-clinical responsibilities afford me. So overall, big picture, kind of what I talk to a lot of the fellows about is I think my work-life integration is certainly much, 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 much better than what it is in first year fellowship, right? When you're really, really heavy from a clinical perspective and a call perspective. But like as a third year fellow, I wasn't doing much clinical time or call at all. And so perhaps a little bit more than that, but a little bit less than first year. And again, this is going to be variable depending on your unique position. So kind of as Betsy and I were talking about earlier, Betsy's doing a couple calls a month. I on average am doing closer to like 4 to 6 calls a month. But I also do a combination of in-house call and home call. So a lot of my calls when they're home call it's less grueling perhaps than doing an in-house call, right? And so I can do more of them, and I can still be home at nighttime to have dinner with my kids and to put them to bed. And so quite frankly, that has worked really, really well for me. And I have almost never this year kind of missed bedtime with my children, which for me has been kind of a priority. And I've been able to have really great kind of work-life balance and still accomplish and achieve all the things that I want to do professionally. So it was kind of a long roundabout answer, but overall, my work-life integration has been great, I think, compared to training.
Yeah, it is. It's a really good question. Things are different with your work-life integration. I guess to provide a few direct comparisons. So practically as a fellow, we often were on Q4 call. I fast-tracked, so I did 2 like very intense years of fellowship where I was on Q4 call most of the time with a couple of months to breathe. And I also had twins my first year of fellowship, which I would not recommend, but it happened and it went well. And yeah, I was very like lucky to have a healthy pregnancy, healthy babies, very little maternity leave, as we all know, is like all a problem. So I guess that's what I was doing as a fellow. And then you all know, I just talked about like my clinical schedule as a faculty member. So, I think it is nice to be home a lot more. I'm always on in hospital call. So I'm in-house. For me, again, as like a working mom. Oh, go ahead. Oh, maybe that was an accident. I'll continue. So for me as a working mom, I actually really enjoy, that's a weird way to say it, but I am very purposeful about my in-house call because it's 24 hours. So, and I will say in general, my in-house calls tend to be either honestly fairly easy in the sense that I have a senior fellow who's very good at management, who will update me for things, but maybe there isn't a lot of activity that night. We're super full. We can't take any new admissions, that type of thing. So I do have nights like that. I also have nights where, I am running from one emergency to another, and we've all been there. So, but I often plan on the nights that are quieter to take advantage of that time. And I get a lot of lab work done on the nights that are quieter. I think the other thing just to maybe keep in mind is that your documentation load is a lot bigger as an attending or junior faculty. So that's something that if you are in a fellowship where you don't have to do a lot of documentation, our fellows are in that position, enjoy it. Our notes burden, just progress notes, is burdensome. And I don't know, I think that's an active area of discussion. I'm a proponent of using ChatGPT to write my progress notes, but we'll talk about that more at a different time. I think that's all I have to talk about on that topic, just because, I was still doing a lot of research as a fellow. I'm still doing a lot of research. So those aspects of my life haven't changed a lot. My twins just started kindergarten, and that, in terms of my work-life integration, was very helpful.
Absolutely. I love the chat GPT idea. It would be great for progress notes. Let's see, the next question. I'll direct this at Misty, because you're probably the most likely to get this question or have people try to ask you this question. So how does one best discuss salary and benefits with a future employer?
That's a great question, because everyone tells you not to ask about it, but you have to know about it eventually because it's a huge determining factor. So I'll take the benefits question first. A lot of that can really be found online. So I would do your homework, like once you're really considering a place, do your homework, look at the HR websites, to search for the different items. But I would say that once you finally get an offer letter or contract, there should be like a link or an attachment that talks a lot about the benefits. It may just, kind of be the standard. Like some people ask me, is there any opportunity to negotiate benefits, for example? And there usually isn't, especially for like healthcare and things like that. It's pretty standard for the university. There are some things, you know, in a contract, obviously, that can be negotiated, and that's, I'm happy to chat about that. I will say from a salary perspective, it depends. So academia, there's a wide range, but there's also, you know, private academia, like private school academia, and also state school academia. And I would say, I think Betsy had put it in the chat, like a lot of the state school salaries will be online. So you can find that information online. So it may be that, you know, if you're starting as a first year faculty as an assistant professor, there's a set salary. And like, there's no wiggle room, because sometimes it's all about equity and it's like, this is a salary. But there are other things that are in contracts that can, you know, there's a base salary and then there's total compensation. So things that you could, you know, ask about related to the compensation plan, any bonuses that are offered. That includes a sign-on bonus or like a yearly bonus. And is that related to RVUs that you're working, if whether you're, you know, clinical faculty or research faculty, but also if you're on the investigator track, is there like a research bonus, for example? So some places will offer a bonus that if you cover X% of your salary, you may receive additional compensation at like, you know, bonus time. There may be places that there are no bonuses, so don't always expect it, but these are things that are a little bit harder, I would say, to find online. But you should always ask, like, it's, you know, when you're getting to that point, and I try to be transparent about it because I know people want to know. And so I say, this is what our typical, you know, first year faculty start out at, and this is what you can expect from a salary perspective. Some places will give cost of living raises. Some places aren't able to do that, and you get more of a, like a bigger bump when you go from like instructor to assistant to associate, et cetera. But those are good things to talk about upfront in a more, I would say, generalizable way. But keep in mind, you can always negotiate, you know, sign-on bonuses. Moving stipends are really important. It's expensive to move, and on a fellow salary, it can be really, really hard, you know, to move. And so ask about that. Ask about CME money. So you can ask, you know, just in terms of benefits, these are things to definitely ask about, because you want CME money to attend conferences, even if you're not necessarily a researcher, like, you know, PAS, et cetera. The other things that people negotiate are start times. You don't always have to start, you know, July 1, or you can take a little bit of time off and, you know, make it work for you and your partner or family, et cetera. And then, you know, in terms of other things to negotiate, we talked a little bit about protected time, and then what you do with that protected time for your scholarly pursuits will be important. So those are things to talk about upfront before your offer letter or contract comes. I think the back and forth with the division chief about like just little things here and there. I would just, you know, we're all busy people and we want to advocate for you. And sometimes it's not about what we want to give you, it's about what is available and what we can ask our chair for. So I would just, you know, it seems like we're the ones doing the negotiating, but there may be other factors behind that. I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you, Missy. I think that's a really great insight. And just a general reminder to people that there will be a session on negotiations and contracts later in the fall. So be tuned to that, because it's a very important and can be touchy topic, but we're here to help.
Can I chime in with a couple of other benefits that can be, you know, important parts of the salary or just the compensation package that I've recently learned about? So some private institutions will also offer tuition benefits for your children and or spouse partner. So I think that can be major. For example, I'll just say at Stanford, they pay the equivalent of half tuition of Stanford for any of their schools to any other institution, and they pay it directly so that like it isn't taxed from your salary. That's a major benefit. I've heard Columbia has a similar benefit. UCSF doesn't have any of those benefits. So I think tuition benefits, mortgage benefits, for those of us in high cost of living areas, there are different mortgage programs. And also, like in terms of childcare, there can be, like UCSF does actually have a pretty generous backup care benefit where we can use 20 days a year when your like typical childcare falls through. You can access all of these other resources, babysitters, daycare centers. That's been really helpful. And then also there can be like legal packages where you can pay like a small copay and have someone do all of your will, those types of benefits. So those are other things that I've learned about recently that can save you a lot of money.
Awesome. Thanks, Betsy. So next question, I'm actually going to give to Rob first, give Misty a bit of a speaking break, and then Misty, if you can chime in with other pieces. So Rob, since you probably advise people on this situation a lot, what are some general pieces of advice for someone who wants to stay in academics but is restricted to a specific location?
Yeah, that's kind of the New York conundrum. It's a very desirable place, and there are a lot of reasons a lot of people want to stay, and then there are limited jobs. And I guess I would say a couple of things. First of all, it is amazing how variable it is year by year, the jobs that are open. So like some years there are like jobs everywhere. Like there are maybe like 5-10 jobs available in the New York area. And then another year, there's that one job that's always available. There's like one, and it's always available. So, you know, you have like, so I guess what that means is, you know, you may have to take a job that's not ideal, do your best there, or go somewhere else and then come back if what you really want is to be in New York. So that's one possibility. Like I would encourage you to really differentiate yourself and find your niche, like find what it is that you're going to do that makes you special, that the institute that is going to make you very valuable to an institution, right? Like every institution needs someone who is, you know, does palliative care. That's like a kind of like, that's a great like thing to have in your department. It's great to have somebody who's like a SIMS expert who really knows it, who can like run those programs and NRP and all that. Like those are just examples, but there are many ways that you can differentiate yourself that will be like that. Everyone just kind of needs one of those. And if you could be a great one, then that'll make you more attractive. You know, you have to follow your passion. And if it's not sincere, I don't think it's going to drive you. You're not going to want to keep doing it. But I think that also participating in regional, local meetings, getting to know people, networking, kind of having your ear to the ground. Because as I said, like most of the best jobs don't come up, you know, they're not posted. They're like, oh, someone decided to leave and then there's an opening, or someone's expanding, so now they're going to hire. And generally the word of mouth is the way that those are kind of like, you know, come to be known. So you know, that's at least in our region, all the division directors know each other. They all chat, you know, they're all kind of friends. And if there's somebody who's a really good fellow, then they're going to be in demand. And you know, so, but again, it varies year by year. So just really pay attention to what's going on in your area. Start your searches, you know, not too early, but you know, don't wait until it's too late, because you could miss an opportunity.
I'll add on to that. I would say if you're restricted to a specific location, I would start a little bit earlier, because I will say the division chiefs may not know if they have a position available, and they may still be in the budget period where they're trying to figure out if they will have a spot or multiple spots, and if there's any faculty movement. But again, I wouldn't wait for a position to be posted. It may never be posted, you know, depending on if it's a state school or not. And from a timeline perspective, I had somebody reach out to me like in February this year that was looking for, you know, July 2024, which, you know, certainly is a bit early, I will say, but that person's now on my radar, right? And so if I do have a position that's posted, but again, I don't yet, because we haven't gotten budget approval yet. But if I do get that, then I'll remember that I basically have a list of people that once they reach out to me, I contact them and move forward with potential applications, recruitments, et cetera. But I do think you need to use your network. So either your program director or division chief, like I get a lot of calls. I had a call last night about a person that is potentially looking, not even started looking at. And so you never know who's going to advocate for you on their behalf and when, and you just want to make sure that you're ready. And a lot of it, I will say for division chiefs, when we go to PAS, for example, like there's a lot of opportunity to meet with potential applicants when we may not even have a position posted yet, or may not have an idea if we're going to have positions, but it's a good idea to network for that meeting. I've, done some interviews when, after people have presented and I got to hear about their work. And I think using those even informal interview opportunities are also priceless. So, and then, sorry, one more thing. The other thing I would say, just depending on what your fellows are listening, remember that your fellowship is basically a 3-year interview. And so you're interviewing the program, and do you want to say, so use that opportunity to talk to a bunch of faculty and see what it is that they do. And if you want to emulate that particular career path, talk to them about it, go grab coffee or something. But then also on the flip side of that, know that you're being interviewed as well, like informally. And so behave appropriately. Like there are opportunities that come up when we're all tired, and you want to maintain a professional environment at all times, because these are the people that you're going to be working with. I had somebody that is just retiring that has worked here for 40 years. So you never know if you're going to be in an institution for a long time, and you want to make sure that your image is professional and friendly.
I would say just add 2 things onto that. Number one, if you want to stay somewhere locally and your institution does a lot of transport, that's also an opportunity to kind of interview, and also to like get to know other people in the community. They know your skills, and just because they're level 4 institutions, if you're the only ECMO, if you're one of a few ECMO centers, other level 3 hospitals that are academic, also refer. Those are really key opportunities. And then the other thing is that definitely in New York, there are a lot of academic centers that have level 2 affiliates, and they have kind of hybrid jobs where you're working in a level 2, but you also work at the level 3-4 main hospital. And, if you can't find, if there's no job available in the primary academic hospital, some people will take those jobs and then work their butts off to get academic footing. And it's not good for lab work because you don't have enough protected time to do it. But if you're interested in clinical research and you do a lot of good things, the division director might say, you know what, you're more valuable at the primary site with some protected time. We're going to find someone else to do that role, et cetera. So like those things are possibilities. I wouldn't count on it necessarily unless that's something that's stated explicitly, but that's just another route if there doesn't happen to be the job that you really dream of available.
Thanks, Rob. So move into the next question. So this one will be for Betsy first and then Morgan after. So academic salaries are at times significantly lower than private practice salaries. What keeps you in academia?
Yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about these kind of sensitive issues. I will say that my division chief, so Kaiser is, a very, also a very good job for neonatologists in Northern California. My division chief decided that he wanted to make it a priority that folks would not have to leave UCSF just for salary reasons. So in his words, he says that he makes sure that we keep our salaries within spitting distance of Kaiser, at least, which is like the main other employer in our region and private practices. So I guess I will say also, I think that's an example of good leadership, that he wanted to make sure that that wasn't, our main issue. And related, I guess what I would say is that, I do less clinical work than I would in private practice. So I actually think that like scaled, my salary is quite appropriate. So, but beyond that, there are other opportunities in academia. I guess we'll stay on the salary topic for the minute. There are other opportunities in academia to make money. I think as you get better known for your research, their honorarium. We haven't talked a lot about traveling to conferences, but I'm an extrovert. I really like traveling to conferences, and as an academic, either if you're a speaker, they pay for you to go to the conference, so it's sort of compensated travel, or you pay for it out of your lab funds. And I really enjoy that aspect of my lifestyle. I think, otherwise, we've talked about the other things that keep me in academia. I think my passion to address germinal matrix hemorrhage, and just in general, to try to improve our care through research. And I think the lifestyle considerations where I can be more flexible for my own personal interests and my family.
I completely agree with all of that. And really kind of, I think the moral of the story is like, this answer for me is kind of the exact same answer as why I chose academia in the first place, right? Like all of those reasons that I chose it and the things that I'm really passionate about are what kind of maybe offset the potential salary difference. And so, right, like my only advice to, I think, you as you're applying for jobs is to, again, think about the things that are most important to you. What are your priorities? And then go after that. And so if you happen to be somebody that says, well, I really care about making the most money in neonatology, then maybe private practice is for you if that's super, super important to you. And you want to be extremely well compensated for your clinical time and what you do. But if you have other priorities and things like we've already mentioned, the things that I care most about and I'm really passionate about, then it's okay to me to have my salary a little bit lower. Again, because I have so many other things that I see as a benefit, which are both kind of tangible and non-tangible things, right? And so some of those kind of really tangible things are all the opportunities that I have working with trainees, and the kind of way that I have a lot of balance in my non-clinical time. And then really, again, like what my just day-to-day life looks like and how my kind of work time balances with my family time. So I think, right, like I've been able to carve out the things that are most important to me. And so just, right, none of us can answer that question for you. You just have to think about what's most important to you, and then choose from there.
I would like to add that the NIH's loan repayment program is generally only available to you if you're in an academic center. And as a former recipient of that program, I cannot sing its praises more highly. It is literally the only grant you will ever pay for that literally pays your debt, I think. I mean, there may be others, but like every other grant sponsors your research, this actually allows you to be an academician without crushing debt. So the success rates are astoundingly high, like 50% success rate. So yeah, consider that.
That's a really important point too, actually. And thank you for bringing that up, right? Like I'm going to hopefully do public service loan forgiveness because I am working at a nonprofit large academic center. And so that in itself makes up a very significant salary difference and is definitely a large motivator. So think about those things too.
I would just second what Rob said about NIH loan repayment. If you're doing a lot of research and you have debt, make sure you apply for that. It took me a couple times actually before I was successful, but they paid over $250,000 of my loans. So it's considerable.
Excellent tip. So we're running a little short on time. I'm going to try to squeeze in one extra question here, and then I'll have a final question for the rest of you. I'm going to direct this question probably at Rob first and then Misty after. And I chose this one to sneak in just because it seemed like a lot of the questions submitted were along the lines of, can I do academics if I don't want to do research? In that vein. And so I thought this was a really great question. So what are some ideas for professional development or advancement activities for someone who wants to spend most of their time doing clinical work in the academic setting?
So it absolutely is possible. Plenty of academic centers have primary clinicians who don't do research. That's not really a big expectation. But then you have to ask yourself the question, what is it I am going to do, right? Like there is going to be some other time when you're not in the NICU. So what is the area that you are interested in that is going to make you valuable to the department? Because somebody who's a good clinician, honestly, I would say like 90% of all the fellows who graduate are going to be great clinicians. They're going to do wonderful. We're selective. We're lucky enough to attract really good people to this field. But what is it that you're going to do that's going to add to the division? So are you interested in QI? Are you interested in some type of, administrative role? Is there something that you do that, could set you apart that will fulfill a need that the division would have? I would say that that's the kind of questions I would ask myself, because otherwise you're just, and there are pure clinical roles. Like I know that some institutions have they need nighttime coverage. They hire qualified new fellows to just work nights. And it's a hard job. But if you can really work your butt off and do some things during the days when you're not covering the nights and demonstrate, that you're going to be productive research-wise, then those folks will get converted to daytime positions and get academic appointments, and then you're in a fantastic institution. But it's not going to be that easy. So you have to be willing also to think about what it is what you're going to offer, I think.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think I was just writing in the chat, sorry. So I would say, it's definitely one of those things. You want to, if you're going to work in academics and not do research of any kind, which so many people do, the research path is really difficult. You do want to make sure that you have some kind of scholarly output. What that looks like is different for many different people. So Rob gave a lot of good ideas, but just to reiterate, teaching, document all those things, because workshops, if you're interested in POCUS, for example, putting together a workshop, presenting at PAS, if you're interested in quality improvement and your hospital is part of the Children's Hospital Neonatal Consortium or VAUGHN or something like that, present at those conferences. You don't have to necessarily do research, but get credit for the work that you're doing. If you're on a quality improvement committee, for example, submit that for your center and just think about how you can build your scholarship around your interests. I think that is important, but also get academic credit for that. So it doesn't always have to lead to a publication, but it does need to hit your CV. So that way, when your division chief goes to promote you, they can ask, inside and outside your institution, letter of, promotion, letter of recommendation writers. They want to know that you're contributing to scholarship in various ways. And so just thinking about, the first 5 years of your career, and then certainly beyond that, but the first 5 or so years, how to get you promoted. When you primarily spend a lot of your time doing clinical work, you want to make sure you're getting credit for what you're doing in your non-clinical time.
I think for that, I completely agree. I think there's plenty of things in academia to do that aren't, direct basic science or clinical research. Our section has 4 pillars that we talk about all the time. It's advocacy, education, research and innovation, and clinical care. And so if you're doing one of those and then finding some way to be productive in them, then you'll be successful and needed in academia. So I think there's a role for everyone, and just a general reminder that also to make a section function, there also need to be clinicians in a section. And so I think all of those positions are valued and have their own needs and wants around them too. All right, I think that probably brings us to enough time for our last question. I'm sorry, Rob, you're not on here, but I'll squeeze you in there at the end. So what is your #1 advice for candidates entering the academic job search? So I'll say Morgan, Betsy, Mitzi, and then Rob, you get to finish this up.
So I've said this a few times and I'm going to say it one more time. I think really just be honest with yourself about what is most important to you. So do a lot of self-reflection before you start this job search and you start talking to other people and interviewing, right? Really interview yourself and think about what are you most passionate about, what is most important to you, what are your priorities, and then go advocate for that, is really kind of my take home point.
Okay, Morgan nailed it. So, so maybe as number 2, I will just say that be honest with the folks that you're interviewing with. One piece of advice I got was that you can't go on the job market and look at an outside institution if you wouldn't sincerely consider the job. And I thought that was great advice because, if you're willing to negotiate, if you're really willing to consider it, then that's a process with integrity and people will respect you on the other end, no matter how it goes. So I think as long as you can, have integrity in your negotiations and in your interviews, that you won't burn those bridges that Rob told you not to burn.
Thanks, Misty.
I think that's all really good advice. I would say when you're considering a particular division, you want to ask a lot of questions. And so, when you're on the interview trail, you're used to getting asked a lot of questions and they want to get to know about you, but it is a two-way street. And so make sure you ask a lot of questions, get to know your future colleagues, ask about the strengths and weaknesses of the program, because I think it's really important to know what you're getting into. So in the chat, we were talking about responsibility creep and things like that. It's really important that you have a division chief that is going to support you. And I can't stress it enough. And so I wrote in the chat, assume positive intent if your chief asks you to do something. But there are places that, continue to pile on people, especially if they need something done and they have people that are really good at getting those things done. And so high performers can often, get dumped on. So ask a lot of questions and, really understand what are the what's the future of the division look like? What are the opportunities that may come up in the next 3 to 5 years? Because that may be something that you want to do in 3 to 5 years. So knowing where the division is headed, I think is important. So yeah, just ask questions.
It's hard to go last because all the good ones are taken. But I do want to second what Misty was saying about having a supportive division chief is so important. It really, really can make or break, I think, your success at an institution. But the point that I wanted to make, what I guess to add on to what others have said, is to just make sure that you develop and use your network and contacts. Because so much of this is like just who knows who and people talking and you meeting someone and it just happenstance that some thing happened by luck. So just be present, be there, show up, do your talk, stand by your posters. You never know who you're talking to. Those are things that I think really serve our fellows well, and I've seen really be helpful. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you so much, guys. So again, I think we're kind of right at time here. So I wanted to first thank our panelists and Rob for giving us that wonderful didactic talk in the beginning, and then to Misty and Betsy and Morgan for your wonderful responses and advice for all of our future neonatologists out there. And just to finish, just wanted to give you a couple of reminders. So we will send out a recorded link to this session once available to everyone that registered for this session. Please use this QR code, or Nicole just put it in the chat, just the link to the post-session evaluation. We would love to hear your feedback. And as an added reward for filling out that evaluation, everyone that, if you put your email at the end of it, you'll get the Job Search Series Handbook and Resource Guide, and you'll also get the Zoom chat text as we were trying to kind of fit in some extra questions on the side there. And just a reminder for our upcoming sessions on July 13th, we'll be having an interviewing tips and tricks. And so similar to this format with a kind of a didactic up front and some Q&A panel at the end. And then October 5th, that'll be that negotiations and job offers Q&A. So we look forward to having you there, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. That was great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Aaron, thank you for moderating, and Nicole for all the heavy lifting in the background. Much appreciated.
Moderating is easy when Nicole sets it up for you.